Welcome to part 2 of turning your line art into painted portraits. In part 1, we turned our line art into black and white portraits and covered the foundations of shadows to add dimension to our portraits. Now to the fun part, turning our black and white portraits that we did earlier into color. Colors are hard to work with. That's why I made this whole video. And if you're not careful, colors can really ruin your hard work. It can make your art go lifeless, undefined, flat. I know this because I've spent hours making cursed paintings repeatedly, and they're not pretty. But then I made my first decent ones, and then another one, and then another one. And now here we are. Through the process of trial and error, I've gathered all of my foolproof methods in this video to share with you all. Because if a slow learner, a slow beginner like me can do it, you can do it too. Alright, foolproof method 1. Understand the 5 values and where they lie in your reference model's face. In part 1, we established the 5 value system, a simplified set of shadows to help guide the shading process. Where the points closest to the light are assigned the lightest of shades, while those that don't get exposed are assigned the darkest. Everything else in between are assigned shadows 2 to 4. I break down this concept and how it applies to painting faces in the first video. To make this process of identifying the values in your photo easier, grayscale your reference picture, then mark the areas with the different values from 1 to 5. Foolproof method 2. Translate the 5 values into color. Why? This will save you time and stress in the long run. When you're in the middle of your coloring and then you come across a nose and you're like, should I make the chin, forehead, and nose the same color? And then you come across a nose shadow and you're like, should I make this nose shadow the same color as the shadows on the chin? What about the eye bag shadow? That's too much micro decisions to make, and you'll end up making it a completely different color to what you started with. You'll get lost in the sauce and restart everything. And I know from experience. In this picture, I eyeballed the picture and made color decisions on the fly. Notice how the eye bags look darker than the nose holes. There's no consistency in the colors because I made each color decision pixel after pixel, versus what I should have done, which is to group the image into chunks of various light conditions. Let's double click into that. I've separated the face into regions, and through the eyedropper tool, I can see that the cheek to chin region is not that different in value, but it does get darker the higher we go. The forehead is darker because of the hair covering the forehead. The eye area is darkest because it's a sunken area, meaning it doesn't protrude out of the face like the forehead and the cheeks, and it's also shielded from the light by the nose bridge. Let's compare that with my picture. Here the brightest area is the forehead, the darkest is the eye region, which checks out, but there's different values across the cheeks, chin, the nose, and above the lips. They don't tell a cohesive story because we didn't map it out. You can see here that the range of values don't match, so the story the reference picture and the drawing is trying to tell through light isn't the same. The reference picture is showing darker values, and these values don't change too much as we navigate across our face. On the other hand, the drawing reflects higher levels of brightness with a larger range of varying brightness levels. So here's what we want to do. Set our 5 values so we can color pick when we're in the middle of coloring. I would start with the skin tone. Since you've marked your pictures with the 5 values, this is most likely shadow level 2. Eyeball the color and mark it. Then follow with the darkest and lightest value. For the darkest level 5 shadow, are they pitch black or slightly lighter? For the highlights or the level 1 value, are they completely white or less stark? These decisions will help you decide the middle values, or levels 3 and 4. So now that we've decided on levels 1, 2, and 5, here's some tips to work on 3 and 4. As a beginner, I avoid making a new color because they can easily make your picture's color story look disjointed. Instead, I use my current palette and either go darker or lighter so that the color scheme looks cohesive. Now, it's not as simple as just adding more black or white to the color. We want the colors to look deep and realistic, So a helpful tip I got from Christoph Young's YouTube channel is that to go darker, you have to make the color you have now darker, more saturated, and a little bit more red. When I tried just making it darker without the whole saturation and red color tip, it makes the shadows feel very dead. On the left was the face I did with just making the colors darker or lighter without the saturation and redness. On the right is where I applied the saturation and redness tip. The difference is slight, but applying this tip really made a difference on how realistic it looks. Another key tip is that if you want to go lighter, do the opposite and make it lighter and less saturated. Now you can start coloring. Here I'm shading the midtones with the same colors as what I marked earlier on, and I'm pressing my pen onto the screen very lightly, so the colors look blended and cohesive. We can always pack in more color if we want stronger or harsher shadows. The colors have to have the same value as the black and white image, so it'll provide the depth we want and the consistency to make it look like it came from the same face. It doesn't look great now, but that's okay. Trust the process and we can always blend more. So here I finished adding the midtones and mapping out the highlights and the darkest points. I've also finished her lips. Now I'm blending everything together and adding some additional details like her eye bags and ears and hair. It's a lot of eyeballing the image and getting all the nitty-gritty details sorted out, but conveniently, since we've mapped out all of our values into its corresponding color, now it's a matching game of translating the value we've marked in the black and white picture to the color we've picked out for it. So what about for pictures where the dark and light parts of the picture aren't super pronounced? In other words, it's a low contrast picture. Well, this brings us to foolproof method 3. When painting low contrast paintings, start the shadows light. What this means is that you don't want to apply the full color on the work. You want to apply it gradually since the values transition ever so slightly in a low contrast photo. For comparison, the left picture is what happened when I started my shadows strong for a low contrast painting. The colors looked very harsh on her face and it was difficult to correct it because blending it between a super light and a super dark color only made it look dirty. On the other hand, starting the shadows light not only looked more natural, but any corrections was only a matter of packing in more color and blending, which is also easier and more intuitive. So the trick here is to treat the shadows as you would to a flaky pastry. The skin of the pastry is made up of thin layers of dough, gingerly stacked up on top of each other. Similarly, to add depth to a painting, you want to apply a thin layer of color, and you can do that by setting your opacity to the lowest level and lightly pressing your pen. To add depth, add more thin layers of a darker value. To add saturation, add more layers of the same color. Regardless of whatever layer you're trying to stack on, always blend. So just as a little recap, today we learned 3 things about converting your black and white pictures into color. Number 1, understand the values in your picture and translate those values into colors. Number 2, the darker it gets, the more saturated and redder, and the lighter it gets, the less saturated and less red it gets. Finally, as a beginner, tread lightly with your shadows as you can pack in more shadows later, and always blend, blend, and blend. And that's it, friends. Click here to watch the full time-lapse process of the drawings I referred to in this video, and follow for more tutorials like these.